all of a sudden I looked up through the trees, and I saw this bright white moon. It was so big, it was a full moon, and it was all white. And then I looked up a little further, and boom, there's another white full moon. It was like a really clear white with a little yellow in it, and it was full. It was very pretty. And so there was two of them.
In this dream, I looked up and I see the moon. The moon is about 40 times bigger than normal. And you saw another moon right above it.
And then I see this moon, and it's huge, this moon, and then I look at it, I'm like, whoa, the moon is huge. And then I see another moon behind it. And I'm like, holy smokes, there's another moon behind it.
For whatever reason, I got out of the bed to look at the moon. This is in my dream. And the moon was full and bigger than normal. And I noticed next to it was like an outline of an eclipse happening. Like it was darker on the edge with a dotted outline that began to form. Then I went downstairs to wash some clothes. And while in the basement, I thought to look outside again, and the outline of the eclipse got even bigger, as if it was getting bigger by the minute. And then went back to doing my work in the house. I looked outside again, and I can see the moon just as full as ever and big. And it was like two moons, they were side by side.
So, in the first dream, I saw two huge, like, full moons in the sky. I believe that there may have been two suns as well. My youngest son, who was 6 at the time, pointed like out the window and said, "Mommy, Jesus is coming."
And so then all of a sudden you see two moons appear in the sky. One moon was huge, like we had never seen it before. And I want to say that that was not our moon. I want to say that the one that was smaller, that was regular and normal looking, was our moon.
That's what I saw, the picture right here.
So here is my drawing. It's not very great, but this is the regular moon. Like, I don't know, regular meaning it wasn't dark out, like I said, but the moon was kind of out already. And it was this big. This is what, you're like, oh, a tree, there's the moon, it looks perfect. Then I saw this. This was so big. It looked like it was not moving, but it looked like it was extremely close. It wasn't a blood moon, it wasn't red, but it didn't look completely white. It was kind of like there were hues of red around it or in it. It looked like 100 times bigger than this. And I don't know where the horizon was at. It was kind of right there, just looming. It was so big. So all that to say, I don't know, I guess I'm just throwing this out there into the mix with the other two moon streams. I don't have any real interpretation for it other than the Lord's getting our attention with different things, and we're all part of the body and we all have different parts.
I dreamt that I was in my apartment and I was looking outside, and what I saw was this big moon, and it almost looked like a super moon or something. It was so big and very low in the sky, and it was very detailed. It was almost like I could see every detail of the moon. This big circle of light came around it, and in the corner of this circle was this beam of rainbow light that almost looked like a crown. And I was just watching this moon, and then this smaller moon that was much brighter than this moon came in the scenery, and it was somewhere around here, and it just went in this motion in front of the moon and just out of the scenery. Just this much smaller moon and brighter. And when I saw this moon, I knew that the rapture will be taking place the same night. I just knew that in my spirit. What you see here, you know, it almost looked like a crown, and what he has been telling me is that it symbolized a crown and a promise, and that this ring of light is actually just a ring, and that it is like symbolized Jesus proposing to his bride.
So today I wanted to do another video talking about this specific dream that I had on May 12th, not too long ago of this year, 2020. I had a dream that I saw a big moon, okay? It was big, right in my face, big moon. And in this big moon, it was a little bit hazy, like it was hard to see the clarity of the moon, but then it became more clear. It was a big moon, really big. And then on the upper right side, I saw a normal sized moon, the kind of moon you normally see from Earth. Like when you look up, you see the moon, it's that size. But this moon right in my face was a huge moon, okay? So there's two moons in my dream. Then I see on the upper left side of the sky, or the galaxy, I see two planets. And near these two planets, I see a meteor coming down from the upper right side down. So I see a meteor. And at that moment in the dream, I began to speak in tongues. And I was filled with so much joy, and then in the dream I began to speak in tongues, and at that moment I knew the rapture was happening. And I woke up and the dream ended.
So there's a handful of moon dreams that people have posted on YouTube, and usually in the comment section there are people adding comments where they too have had moon dreams. So that multiplies, do the math. A lot of moon dreams out there. And included in these dreams are specific attributes of the moon, or the moon doing something that we have just reviewed in the previous dreams. And then there was the dreamer who held up a drawing and said the bigger moon to the right was 100 times bigger than the first one. And that it wasn't a blood moon, but it had tinges of red around it. Well, on the day in question, from the perspective of being in Jerusalem, when the moon is on the horizon, it is just beginning to go into eclipse, and you just see the beginning of the moon turning to blood. But the moon itself at this moment in time is not a total blood color yet. It will, though, after it drops down below the horizon, when it's in the earth and comes into full eclipse, and then it's a full blood moon. In the last dream, the young lady talks about seeing two planets with an asteroid cruising through them. Well, I initially thought she was talking about two blood moons as opposed to two planets, because that's what everybody else was seeing. And I initially suggested what she saw was two blood moons, because that lines up with the 4 blood moon tetrad when her celestial event takes place. It'll take place between 2 of the blood moons of our current 4 blood moon tetrad. That would be the super blood moon of May 15th into the 16th, and the second one, the blood moon on November 7th into the 8th. But upon further inspection, and after identifying what she called an asteroid coming from the upper right down to the lower left with these 2, what she called planets, to the left, well, that perfectly matches part of the timeline or storyline of what other people have called a cracked star turning to light, and others calling a rainbow beam of light, and a third dreamer calling it a beam of light that interconnects 2 of the blood moons, and yet a fourth dreamer that calls it a shooting star. This will all be covered in part 3, the next video of this 5-part series. But let me put up a picture of this shooting star, of this cracked star, coming from upper right to the lower left as it plots and parades across the heavens from Stellarium's standpoint, and right about the time of Pentecost 2022, and seen from Antarctica, because this is where the first solar eclipse took place, and that is when that particular star began plotting as described, right around April of 2022. Well, there are two planets to this star's left as it's moving from upper right to lower left, and only two planets on or about the time of what I calculated to be Pentecost this year of 2022, that being around the third week of August. Now, a week or two earlier than that, there are 3 to 4 planets to the left or just below this star that the scientific community says could go supernova at any time. And a week or two after that date, this star will start to pull away from the ecliptics produced by the orbiting planets, and it will no longer be on a parallel course with the planets and the moon and the sun. In other words, the narrative of the storyline or timeline of this shooting star or crack star or asteroid, or whatever you want to call it, that storyline comes to an end. And I will identify that shooting star or that crack star in parts 3 and 4 of this 5-part series. So all that being said, I believe this young lady did see two planets in what she called the galaxy. I'm sure she meant our solar system for sure, because that's where our planets are. And I'm quite confident now what she saw was two planets as her asteroid was moving from right to left. And like I said, we see that in a stellarium depiction of the path, or should I say the parade, that this star and its constellation takes. It's a very popular and well-known star. It's a very popular and well-known constellation. And it is the only star which is expected to go supernova that plots along this parade that these dreamers see in their dreams. And like I said, it's on or about the time of Pentecost. And what does she say? When all this was happening, she was filled with the Spirit and began speaking in tongues. So I'm walking back my original assessment of what she saw, and now I'm preaching that, yeah, she saw two planets, because that is exactly what will happen in the heavens. It's just that when I first saw that, 6 months to a year earlier, the focus was on the full blood moon of May 15th and 16th. So everyone, including myself, was trying to plug everything into that date, and it just didn't quite work here. And all the major points that she brings up in the storyline of her dream complement each other perfectly. So I now think that she saw two planets that would be Uranus and Mars, and they will be to the left of this shooting star, her asteroid, right around Pentecost of this year 2022, which I believe to be around the third week of August. It's a perfect fit. And here's a critical piece of information that I missed on my initial assessment of her dream, and that's when she said she saw a regular moon to the upper right side of this super full moon. What I just discovered is that for this year 2022, there were multiple supermoons. May 16th, June 15th, July 13th, and the last one being August 11th, just recently. Those were all super full moons. So which one of them would have a regular moon at the next moon cycle? Well, obviously that would be the full moon on September 10th. That is a regular moon. And when I discovered all this in Stellarium, well, I went to look to see if the elevation was greater in September than it was August, because that is what she said. She saw a regular moon to the upper right of a supermoon. When it's to the right, that means it's the next phase, it's the next moon. We know this because we read from left to right, so the moon phases are from left to right. And here she had a regular moon, and it appeared to be to the upper right of the supermoon. Well, that September full moon obviously is to the right, but it will also have a greater elevation. So there is only one moon phase in all of the year 2022 where you have a super moon followed by a regular moon with greater elevation. That would be the supermoon of August 11th, completed one moon phase later on September 10th. So what she saw in regards to this asteroid coming down from upper right to lower left next to these two planets is what I'm discerning to be a very specific star that is plotting against these two planets. And this particular star is expected to go supernova by the scientific community at any time. And again, I'll keep it a mystery until parts 3 and 4 of this 5-part video series. But here it is again. And I'm plotting it against the ecliptic or the orbit of Jupiter, which is very close to how the other ecliptics of the other planets are currently presenting themselves. And I noticed that this mystery star, again, is right next to Mars and Uranus. Those are your two planets. And it's right about the middle of November. It starts pulling away from the ecliptic. So if it's going to do its business, I would think that would happen before it starts pulling away from Jupiter's ecliptic. And that would profoundly fulfill these prophetic dreams that these people are having about a cracked star turning to light, an asteroid coming down by these two planets. Another dreamer saw a shooting star moving to the left, and this asteroid was from right to left. But she saw this shooting star moving to the left towards a crescent. She called it a crescent moon. I think it's the crescent sun of the partial solar eclipse on October 25th. And now very recent dreams have great explosions of light in the heavens, and this light or brilliance or luster was actually prophesied by Jesus as a sign of his return, and that light would go from east to west. And that can't be lightning because the weather fronts that produce lightning move from west to east. And I'll show you in parts 3 and 4 why it's necessary to be standing where this partial solar eclipse, the first one, takes place. That's April 30th, 2022, and gives us that right to left trajectory. It's a little bit complicated, but it'll make sense once you get through it. And that's what you're seeing with this picture in front of you right now, with this mystery star coming down from right to left over Mars and Uranus, plotting against the ecliptic of Jupiter. So this particular dream could not have been pointing to the May 16th season of that super blood moon, but rather this dream, as it were, supplemented all the other dreams, extending this journey to rapture events past August of this year, at least into September. And I think the journey is going to continue up to and including the blood moon of November 7th into the 8th, because that marks the full and blood moon for Tabernacles. And I have a sneaking suspicion God is going to walk us through all his appointed times, all his covenant dates, and all his convocations. And that last convocation is the day after the 7 days of Tabernacles. So what I think she saw was a super full moon of August, and then the regular moon of September, which is called the harvest moon. And they, along with Pentecost, had to be completed before coming upon rapture and or end time events. And I can say that now because this is the update for that particular dream, and today is October 13th. Hey, prophecy is better served up with 2020 vision. Pentecost has come and gone, the harvest moon of September has come and gone, and now I'm standing in October. So her mention of rapture events obviously is still ahead of us. And when we apply that to all the other prophetic dreams, well, since they are all pointing to the year 2022, I'm thinking it's a good bet that her dream also refers to the year 2022. And this supermoon followed by a elevated regular moon as this asteroid is coming down with 2 planets to its left. Well, in my book, all those things in combination, along with these other dreams I just mentioned, places it in the year 2022 as opposed to some other year. So let's continue. Now, these other dreamers did see 4 blood moons or 2 blood moons, and their storylines are most probably speaking of one or more of the moons of the 4 blood moon tetrad we're currently in. The main focus being that 3rd blood moon, which, like I said, is May 15th through the 16th. Now I have a 2-part series on YouTube called Passover Pentecost and the 7th-day Weekly Sabbath Lost. It gets into the calendar God gave Moses, which is totally different from what the Hebrew religious culture came away with when they came out of Babylon. They pinned Passover on a calculation starting from the spring equinox. That is not how it's done. It is based upon when the barley wheat is harvested and the first fruits of it is taken to the priests and waved as a wave offering, the barley wave offering, that represents Christ being the first fruits of the harvest. Jesus rose the 3rd day of unleavened bread, and that day was the day they were supposed to perform the barley wheat wave offering. And it typified Jesus being the first of the harvest being offered to God. That's the resurrection. Well, why is that important? Well, because last year, if you were to Google Passover for the year 2021, it came up as March 27th. Well, the barley wasn't harvested until into May. So May was the earliest month that Passover could be observed for the year 2021. Same for this year. If you go and Google it, it's April 15th of 2022. Well, the blood moon is on May 16th, a month later. And what you're Googling is what the Hebrew religious community has put on the internet, and their calculations are based on the spring equinox. Moses did not harvest the barley that sustained the children of Israel for 30 days before God rained manna down from heaven. He harvested the whole thing, had it prepared. It was ready to go, and that night was Passover because that's when they put the blood on the doorposts of their dwellings. In other words, the harvest of the ripe barley was completed, it was processed, it was ready to go. That determined the first day of the first month of the Hebrew year, the month of Aviv. And I'll cover that more in detail later on in the video. But just as a confirmation, I took Stellarium and I walked back the calendar to the years between AD 30 and AD 35 to see if there were blood moons on or about the time Jesus was crucified, because that would be quite the typology if it did. Lo and behold, there was a 4 blood moon tetrad between the years 32 AD and 33 AD. The blood moons falling on Passover of 32, Tabernacles of 32, and then Passover of the year 33 and Tabernacles of the year 33. So if we look just at the 2 Passovers, well, guess what we find? The first blood moon of that tetrad on April 14th of the year 32 sees the moon going into full eclipse at 9 a.m. in the morning, Greenwich Mean Time, or UTC, which would be noon Jerusalem time. Jesus was put on the cross at 9 a.m., and the entire world went dark at noon Jerusalem time. We've got some powerful typology there that we can draw from. I'm leaning heavily towards April 14th of the year 32 AD as the date for Jesus' crucifixion. That was April 14th of the year 32 AD. And I have a strong suspicion that God dialed back the climate and the harvest so it coincided with the corrupted Passover date that the Hebrew religious community was practicing, for the sole purpose of that being an appointed time of God when all the sons of Israel are supposed to congregate in Jerusalem for this convocation. That way, the entire nation of Israel witnessed the crucifixion of Christ. And once they witnessed this, and they did, because everything went dark for 3 hours, where 100,000 pilgrims were supposed to be slaying hundreds of thousands of lambs in the temple, it went black. They couldn't see the hand in front of their face, but they could see a little light on the Mount of Olives illuminating a man hanging on a cross. They all saw it. That's the only thing they could see for that 3 hours. The Passover was cut off by God because the Passover was happening on the cross. They all witnessed it, and they took that story back to their respective towns throughout Israel. And then the word went out, this is the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world. But my point is, back then, the crucifixion took place on one of those 4 blood moons of a blood moon tetrad. We had a full blood moon last year at the end of May. I believe that to be God's Passover because it was on one of the moons of a blood moon tetrad. And besides that, I tried to uncover as many photographs as I could find of when the harvest took place last year in Israel. And the barley was still in the fields in the first and second week of May. So again, the earliest Passover could be observed properly would be at the end of May. Everybody says, Passover's on a full moon, so is Tabernacles. No, it's on the 15th of the month. And it just happens to coincide with a full moon. On the 15th of the month, it could be at 98% waning, it could be at 98% waxing. It's not necessarily a complete 100% illuminated full moon. So Passover and Tabernacles both happen on the 15th of the month, and almost always it's on a full moon, 100% illumination, give or take a few hours. But that's why God said on the 15th of the month you do this, because you cannot differentiate between 96% illumination to 100% illumination down to 96% illumination. There's a 3-day period there where you can't really tell the difference with the naked eye. And since the full moon and the new moon are essential for knowing and discerning an appointed time of God, it helps to have a very reliable system of finding that first day of the month. And the best means for that is to look for that sliver crescent new moon after the moon is in a phase of zero illumination. It's so easy to see a bright light coming out of a dark background, a background that has been dark for a couple days. Boom, there it is. Easily discernible, very accurate. Whereas if you try a system where a full moon is the first day of the month, or a full moon decides a specific appointed time of God, well again, you've got this bright orb in your face for 2 to 3 days, and the naked eye cannot discern the difference. So which day is this day you're trying to figure out? Be it the first day of the month or an appointed time of God. But when you can discern that crescent sliver, boom, that is the first day of the month, You count 15 days, that is your appointed time of God for Passover and for Tabernacles, the 15th day of their respective Hebrew month. So don't be listening to these false watchmen on the wall and prophets and apostles who try to introduce a solar calendar or a lunar calendar or make the full moon the first day of the month. It's totally ridiculous, and that was not the protocol followed by Moses and the children of Israel back in the day. Their protocol was to look for that first crescent sliver moon that pierced the darkness after a couple days of darkness, and they knew exactly the first day of the Hebrew month. And in the two-part series with the introduction, Passover Pentecost, and the seventh-day Weekly Sabbath Lost, we've got pictures and videos of the barley grain standing in the fields up to the third week of April, meaning it still had to ripen some, and meaning that probably the earliest they started harvesting it was the first of the month of May, which means you cannot have Passover in April, which they did, because you need that ripened grain kernel to present before the Lord on the first day of the week of the 7 days of unleavened bread. And I really get deep into this in that two-part series with the introduction, Passover Pentecost, and the seventh-day Weekly Sabbath Lost. I mean, it is so clear how they messed this up. And now we have a blood moon, a super blood moon, a sign and wonders in the heaven, a Genesis 1:14 light in the heaven that signifies God's seasons and God's festivals. Well, that is that May 15th to 16th super blood moon. Thus, the very next day at sunset would start the 7 days of unleavened bread, the first 12 hours being Passover. And it's suggested by these celestial storylines that these dreamers are seeing in their dreams that some major events are going to be fulfilled when you take those storylines and we express them through the stellarium timelines. That is confirming that these celestial parades of planets and eclipses are all happening in the first 2 weeks of May. And take note that some of these dreams have a smaller moon to the left of the larger moon. They're both super moons, but we're seeing this theme again and again where one is just a little bit smaller than the other one. And all of these dreams that I just put up in front of you, the moon to the left is smaller and grows into the larger moon, which is in full eclipse. And I'm noticing the picture in the narrative of the dream that has a halo around it and a crown in the upper left-hand corner. She states that at the beginning of the dream, the full moon was up and to the left of the larger middle moon, and it moves down across the middle moon to the lower right-hand corner, and now it's smaller again. This is exactly what happens on May 16th with this super blood moon. It starts out as a regular supermoon and grows a couple hours later until it's in its full glory of eclipse and a full blood moon. And just minutes after it comes out of the eclipse, it starts to move farther away from the Earth. So its silhouette profile makes the moon look smaller. The timing of this increase and decrease, as she saw in her dream, is just remarkable. And she was equally accurate when she said the smaller moon that started in the upper left-hand corner and raced down to the lower right-hand corner, that it would be brighter. Well, that's because that phase of the supermoon has full illumination and there's no shadow of the Earth on it. Whereas the middle moon, it will be blood red at some point in its eclipse, but a blood moon is also defined as a dirty moon. So naturally, it's going to be darker even though it's bigger. Again, her vision was spot on. And I'm guessing she knows nothing about eclipses and how it affects the brightness of any full moon. And it just builds my confidence that her dream is truly prophetic. And also take special note of where that crown is on her drawing. She called it a crown and that it was illuminated. Well, this is exactly where the blood color will start engulfing the moon when it begins into its eclipse. You've seen this picture before. Like I said, confidence is building that this is truly a prophetic dream. But then I recognized a significant discrepancy. She said that in her dream, when she saw these two moons, that she knew that the rapture was happening that night. Well, it didn't. And that crowned moon is the super blood moon of May 15th at midnight going into May 16th. And I said in the introduction to this 5-part series, in that little video, that two moons or two suns, one being over the second, is normally an eclipse. But if they're to the left or the right or in front or back, that could mean a cycle, or sometimes it's called a circuit, of the sun or the moon phase. For instance, in this case, it could be the super blood moon of May 15th into the 16th. That's the one you see with the circle of light around it, crowned in the upper left-hand side with a blood crown. And the brighter, smaller moon to the right, well, that's a month later. That could very well be the full moon of June 15th. In which case, all the super blood moon and the 4 blood moon tetrad stuff, that's the beginning. Those are the signs and the wonders pointing to the rapture events that these dreamers speak of in one manner or another in their dreams. And her 2 moons plot against stellarium just as she sees it. A super blood moon crowned in the upper left-hand side with a blood crown. You're looking at the stellarium rendering lower right-hand corner of your screen. And the full moon of June is going to be brighter, and it's going to be smaller. And it's going to be lower elevation as well. I can't help but think that God used this as a double application, and both renderings are correct. But the second rendering, where it's the May 15th and 16th moon, followed a month later by the June 15th moon, will have some very special possibilities assigned to it, because that June 15th full moon, that's the second Passover. And the interesting thing about the second Passover is we find it at 911, 911. That is to say, Numbers 911. That has significance because you will see that some of these dreamers have seen 911. I continually see 911, and people responding to my YouTubes often say they see 911. Well, in addition, Genesis 911 is speaking about God's rainbow covenant with Noah. And I pulled all these things together and did a deep dive study into the narrative of the flood. And I believe God used that to help us discover the 7th-day weekly Sabbath on our Greco-Roman calendar. You'll find that study on Passover Pentecost and the 7th-day weekly Sabbath lost, part 2. Just pull your cursor to the upper right-hand corner of your screen, pull down that little white sphere with an eye in it. That's called an eye card. And that will take you to the introductory video for Passover Pentecost and the 7th-day weekly Sabbath lost. From that intro, you can get to either part 1 or part 2. But it addresses this young woman's dream because she points out she saw a rainbow beam of light in the form of a cross. And the light it produced around the moon was a promise from Jesus and a proposal to his bride. And she implies that when we see these things, then the rapture will happen. Well, it did not happen on the May 16th super blood moon, obviously, and it didn't happen on the second Passover moon of June 15th. So you need to go to part 2 of Passover Pentecost and the 7th-day weekly Sabbath lost. God ciphered in these dates into the narrative of the flood, and it joins with these dreams that I'm bringing to you in this video. I mean, all these dreams are connected in one way or another. So quickly take a look at this. You're going to hear me say many times now that I believe God has been rendering a lot of these dreams with a double application. Well, this crown moon is also seen with that blood moon of November 7th into the 8th of 2022, just as it is setting on the western horizon on one of the Earth's meridians as the eclipse begins. Here's a picture of it. Kind of looks like the one on May 15th, seen from the Jerusalem meridian. And the reason I didn't look at this earlier is because the dreamer called what she saw this moon on the horizon, circled in light with the rainbow beam of light on the upper left-hand corner, well, she called it a supermoon, which the May 15th into the 16th blood moon is. It was a supermoon. The one coming this November 7th through the 8th is not a supermoon, and you're not going to see any of it from Jerusalem. So I paid no attention to it. Well, it's still showing that crowned upper left-hand corner, and this will be the moon associated with the rainbow, that being the covenant of Noah. Thus, I'm looking at a double application, at least on some level, and the fact that nothing happened as far as rapture events or serious end-time world events on that May 15th through 16th blood moon, well, I'm left with one last blood moon, and that, like I said, is the blood moon of November 7th through the 8th, the Noah blood moon, which suggests that that rainbow beam of light she sees could very well happen on or about that blood moon. Now, there was a supernova observed by scientists and astronomers back on October 9th. Yes, if you're not figuring this out, this is a plug-in update, okay? In fact, I'm talking to you on the 26th of October now. This is an update. And that supernova they saw, they playfully call it BOAT, B-O-A-T, biggest observed supernova of all time. The problem with that is it gave off a gamma burst. That's what alerted them to this being a supernova. And gamma bursts or gamma radiation does not give off light in the visual spectrum. In other words, you cannot see it with the naked eye. They picked it up with X-ray satellites and high-tech equipment used to measure and identify certain radiation bursts. Now, it did leave behind an orange-like glow, which you still cannot see with the human eye because it's so far away. You would need a powerful telescope just to see that glow. And this thing is like 2.4 billion light years away from the Earth, which if you stacked 10 average-sized galaxies together, that's about how far that is. In other words, your average human being, and even your above-average human being, didn't even know that this event happened. Again, that was back on October 9th, 2022. I don't think that that qualifies as the rainbow of light that this young dreamer saw. I think she saw a supernova that is yet to happen, and I covered that in parts 3 and 4 of this video series. And that one will present probably the size of a large aurora borealis and will track from east to west, which would fulfill a prophecy that Jesus gave as to the season of his return, that this sign would be seen in the heavens. But everybody's got to see it, not just scientists and astronomers using high-tech, powerful satellites and computers. But I think God wanted us to see that first super blood moon of May, and that's why he dialed up this vision for this young dreamer, even though it may have a second application. But again, the second application of November is not a supermoon, and it is not seen from Jerusalem, whereas the first rendering does. To me, that is solid, concrete evidence that God is giving these dreams in such a way that there is multiple applications, because he wants us to see both moons. And like I said, the second rendering of the November 7th through 8th capped moon would match perfectly with anything speaking of Noah, because it would refer to, as in the days of Noah, society will be giving in marriage, planting their gardens, doing their social stuff, and the judgment of God will come upon this earth unannounced and unexpected. And many dreams I've been investigating, and all these prophetic numbers people have been seeing, suggest that that day will be the third day of Tabernacles, which is November 11th, 2022. Just a couple, 3-4 days after this blood moon I'm talking about, as in the days of Noah, the rainbow covenant between God and Noah. So with this double application, we're walking away with possible confirmation that this second blood moon of November 7th through the 8th and the third day of that 7 days of Tabernacles, November 11th, should have special attention given it by all of us that are waiting for the Lord's return. And again, this all has to do with God walking us through all his appointed times for 2022, all his covenant dates in 2022, and all the convocations in 2022. I'll leave you with that, but this is what I'm seeing unfold. I could be wrong, but there's way too much coincidental information coming at me, and I'll include some of that here in the rest of this video and some of the other videos in this 5-part series. That is to say, the double application of these dreams and God walking us through all 7 months of his appointed times, covenant dates, and convocations. So let's move on. So now we're going to look at one of the most remarkable dreams I've ever come across. This young lady starts talking about a rock floating in space, and it's right in the face of the planet Saturn. And there's no way on earth that this lady could have known this, unless God gave it to her. And God did give her this vision, and she still didn't understand what it was. And it's coming to pass as I speak right now. So let's get into that dream first. So these next 2 dreams are just incredible. Over the moon, pun intended. The first one we're going to look at, I almost completely ignored. The young lady was talking about Saturn turning into a spaceship, and that being the result of some effort from the Antichrist and stuff like that. And I just thought, this is just too much. But something kept bugging me to look deeper. And I did. And wow, did it open up. And not only does it match everything that we just looked at, It adds a very special and very incredible piece of evidence having to do with a floating space rock. And that space rock knocks the probability factor off the charts. And if you don't have an appreciation for probability, let me just put it to you this way. You have a better chance of walking into every state of the union and laying money down on the table for their lottery and winning every lottery on the same day than for the reality of this rock to be floating as she describes it. So if you don't understand probability, I'm guessing you understand the lottery and your chances at the lottery. So take a listen and then we'll get into this. This is mind-boggling.
So I had this dream May 22nd, 2021. And in the dream, I'm sitting in a house that is not my own. Well, it suddenly falls to night. And when I go outside, I see huge in my face, a huge, low and close to the earth blood moon. Red, orange, very detailed, crisp moon, full and vivid and bright. And it was like just jaw-dropping, like, what is this moon doing so close to Earth? Almost concerning, but there was no fear. And behind this huge blood moon was like a crescent moon, like just slightly behind it, but farther away and smaller, was like a regular size, just normal crescent moon. And so there was two moons in the sky, side by side. Again, one was much closer, much bigger. The other one was smaller, and you can tell like a little bit more distant. And so when I saw this, I automatically knew in my spirit, like at that moment, that the rapture was about to take place. Like I just had this knowing in my spirit that this was a sign that the rapture was going to take place. So as I turn around to run back into this house that I'm at, in the opposite direction of the sky, I see Saturn. And Saturn looks as if it does, but it was more, I could see it more in detail, and it seemed a little bit closer to Earth too, because I could make out that it's Saturn. And you can't really see Saturn in its rings with the naked eye if you're just outside looking up at the sky. So I knew that this was Saturn, and I'm looking at Saturn, and all of a sudden, Saturn starts to morph into a UFO, and it maintained its shape, but the color like changed, and it just like moving, right? It's moving, and I'm just like staring at it, like what is going on? And as I'm staring at it, it zooms up, and it just takes off and then disappears, like out of sight. It's just gone out of the sky. And in its place where it was is just this like space rock that's just like floating there in the sky. It just looks like, I don't know how else to describe it, but like a space rock that's just stationary and floating there. And when I saw this, I automatically in my spirit knew, just as well as the signs with the two moons, that, oh my goodness, this is happening now. Like, there is no more time left.
So the first thing that she sees in her celestial storyline is a huge blood moon. Where have you heard that before? Well, all the dreams we just went through. But take note that she sees a blood moon that is huge. It is not a full regular supermoon that's about to eclipse. She sees it in its full eclipse. That's why it's in her face, close to the earth, and blood red. So that part she accurately described. When the moon is in full eclipse, it is the closest to the earth through this entire phase. Just hours earlier, it's farther away from the earth. So it's approaching the earth as it comes into eclipse, and it's at its maximum approach in the eclipse. And what did she see behind it? A smaller crescent moon. Well, it cannot have a total lunar eclipse and a crescent moon on the same day. A crescent moon occurs on the first day of the month. A full moon lunar eclipse happens on the 15th day of the month. The two cannot occur on the same day. But what did we just learn? We learned that this particular blood moon of this tetrad will be a crescent as it drops through its moon set. It's cut in half. It's a crescent. And take note, she did not identify it as being red. Just a regular crescent moon, smaller, but very close to the full blood red moon. All these little details are extremely important. It then grows into this full blood red moon, close to the earth and close to the horizon, only that it's below the horizon, and then the dream changes. And I took the liberty to crop some of her video because she said that she saw Saturn turn into a UFO and then it zoomed off, and that this process was something the Antichrist was doing. Well, the Antichrist could do nothing to Saturn. Many people think that the Antichrist will use a UFO narrative to explain away the rapture. That part of her narrative could be extremely accurate, but the activity of Saturn itself is not. And Saturn zooms away, and left in its place is this rock. Well, that rock and Saturn doing their thing is a sign from God. It's not a counterfeit sign from the Antichrist. Let me explain. According to Stellarium, when Saturn starts moving away from the other 4 planets, we will see a large rock where Saturn was. And from our perspective, it will look like it's just sitting there, floating in space. And according to Stellarium, this is not just any rock. This is the second largest asteroid in the solar system. It is called Vesta, and it is parked between the Earth and Saturn. So with our line of sight, it looks like it's in the same location of Saturn, but it's much, much closer to the Earth and extremely far away from Saturn. It is actually in the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter. And so to the naked eye, looking up into the heavens, it looks like it actually replaces Saturn as Saturn zooms away. And it is, as it were, floating, just sitting there doing nothing. She didn't know this. I'm sure she knows very little about solar eclipses, lunar eclipses, and asteroids. But there it is in her dream. That is a prophetic from God. And let me tell you a little bit about this Vesta asteroid. It's 325 miles wide. It almost qualifies as a mini planet. It's traveling 50,000 miles per hour. It's 204 million miles from the sun. Its orbit takes 1,325 days. It is 728 million miles from Saturn. It has a 1.28 billion mile orbit. Yet it's parked right in front of Saturn and stays there as Saturn zooms away. It is figuratively floating in that location, and it stays even with the other 4 planets in this alignment of planets. And it follows these other 4 planets as if it was Saturn. We'll see these planets kind of split up through the year of 2022, but in 2023, there's still a partial alignment. We only now have 3 planets and Vesta. Saturn now is lagging far behind because it's got one of the slowest orbits of all the planets, and Mars is zooming ahead. So there is no 5-planet alignment for 2023, so that year is disqualified as being a fulfillment of these prophecies we've been looking at. But you have Venus, Jupiter, Mercury, and you'll see here in the picture I just threw up kind of a red marking here. That's the location of Vesta. And Uranus is in there too, but you can't see it with the naked eye. This asteroid you can see with the naked eye at certain parts of the year, and as of right now you can see it with binoculars. What's my point? Well, look at the vastness of space, and lo and behold, we get a rock parked right in front of Saturn, and it fulfills to the letter what this young lady saw in her dream. If that isn't prophetic, I don't know what is. And just think back to that lottery. Good luck with that. And this is a few magnitudes greater than any lottery or all the lotteries combined. This is mind-boggling to those who can appreciate probabilities and lotteries. In other words, this is 100% prophetic. Her celestial storyline matches perfectly with the Stellarium timeline. And when does Stellarium tell us this is going to happen? May 16th, 2022, the day in question that we're looking at. And what does she say about this day in her narrative?
Once we see those signs, like, there's no more time, and that, Jesus was coming right then and there. So
Time's short. Things are going to happen. You guys do the math. I'm just putting this information out there. You got to wrap your head around this and come up with a conclusion. So before we go to this next amazing 2-moon rapture dream that I alluded to earlier, I want to spend a few more minutes on this rock, the asteroid called Vesta. Take a close look at its picture. It's what you don't see. And what you don't see is this picture was taken by a satellite probe about 1,000 miles away. So what does that have to do with anything? Well, this asteroid is almost in the middle of the asteroid belt. And it puts a satellite probe that took its picture on the other side of the sun from the Earth. And when they turned around and took pictures of the space behind the sun, guess what they found? They found nothing. There was no Nibiru. But to get all these dreamers talking about Nibiru racing up towards the Earth and soon to be in the Earth's orbit, and that's their definition of the second sun or second moon, because that's the only thing in their mindset that would describe the second sun or second moon. Now remember, the narrative or the storyline concerning Nibiru is that it's a brown dwarf star with a couple planets orbiting around it. And on one of the planets we've got aliens. And these are the aliens that populated the Earth tens of thousands of years ago. By the way, the last time it was allegedly zooming past the Earth was 556 BC on a 3,600-year orbit, which would mean it's on its way out, not on its way in, if the thing even existed in the first place, and that it won't be back until the year 3000. But I contend it never existed in the first place, because if it's approaching the Earth from behind the sun on a direct line of sight vector course towards the Earth from being behind the sun, that means it has to go through the sun to get to the Earth, and that would produce a supernova. So the Earth and all humanity should have been eliminated back in 556 BC. Not only that, but it is alleged to have the same gravitational force of the sun, even though that brown dwarf star is the size of Jupiter. So what would two suns in our solar system produce? Well, it would produce twice the gravitational pull coming from the sun and coming from this alleged mini solar system called Nibiru. So even before it crashed into the sun, we would have twice the gravitational pull on all the planets, including the Earth, which would probably reduce their distance to the sun by half, pulling the Earth into an orbit equivalent to Mercury or Venus, both which have surface temperatures of 800 degrees or more during the day. In other words, back in 556 BC, the Earth should have been fried to a crisp before the sun went supernova. But somehow we escaped this terrible fate, and now Nibiru is heading back our direction. Yet this doubling of gravitational forces somehow has not affected the orbits of the planets of the solar system, nor the Earth. In other words, it doesn't exist. But what does exist is the false doctrines and Christian mysticism that is orbiting the Nibiru doctrine. And this gets morphed into all kinds of manifestations, which is then passed around the body of Christ as if it were a pandemic in and of itself. This is a fraudulent and diseased doctrine, as it were a virus that has infected the body of Christ. And this is why I sometimes say this is not the prophetic movement, this is the pathetic movement. These doctrines are distractions, and any false doctrine is not a good thing. And the Apostle Paul says twice in Galatians 1, if any man or even an angel preach something that they have not preached, that man or angel is to be cursed. Paul never preached on Nibiru doctrine. But like I said, I get it when people have dreams and they have no idea what it is, when they see two suns, two moons, four moons, and they can't explain it. But in a form of carelessness, they embrace these Trojan horses. And often these people no longer qualify as watchmen on the wall or prophets or apostles, but become what I would call Humpty Dumpty, who sits on the wall, falls, does face plants, and they're all cracked up. If anything, it's just a sorry and poor reflection of the gospel, or at least common sense. We have to be more careful to test the spirit and be a vanguard against these false doctrines, which are gateways to even worse doctrines. The doctrine of Nibiru is easily proven as a fraud, simply by using God science. All science comes from God. It is often perverted by the secular world, but God's the one who created the laws of thermodynamics, the laws of physics, all the laws involved in astronomy. And since the orbits of all the planets, including the Earth, have been constant since recorded time, and are constant as we speak, and since we cannot witness a huge brown dwarf star solar system sneaking up to the Earth from behind the sun with our satellite probes, well, there's God's science in action. You may not appreciate the gravity of these doctrines, pun intended, but I've seen Christians walk off the deep end because they fully embrace such foolishness. Test the spirit and do some research on the origins of these doctrines. This one started in 1976 from a self-proclaimed psychic. So here's a picture of Nancy Leiter, I believe that's how you pronounce her name, who reintroduced this Nibiru Planet X back in 1995. In other words, this is kind of a doctrine of our generation. Most definitely, this was not preached by the apostles or the apostle Paul, and he warns against such things. He said, if any man or any angel preach anything other than what they have preached, that man or angel should be cursed. That's Galatians chapter 1. It's stated twice for double emphasis. And Miss Leiter here had a website called Zeta Talk, and it was all on extraterrestrial stuff. And she claimed that these extraterrestrials from the Nibiru system put an implant in her head so she could communicate with them. This is where the doctrine of Nibiru comes from. But it had even earlier origins. And I'll throw that up on the screen for you so you can read it for yourself. But this basically came from Babylon. It's a Babylonian doctrine. Nibiru was called the Star of Marduk, and it was actually assigned to a constellation, not an orbiting small solar system that orbits every 3,000 to 3,600 years. And apparently this acted as a portal to astral immortality. So when we have these so-called watchmen on the wall, or false prophets, false teachers, continuing to bring this to the consciousness of the body of Christ, basically they're introducing Babylonian doctrine, which makes them false teachers. And they have absolutely no evidence to the existence of this alleged dwarf star that, if it even got close to the Earth, would suck the Earth into its atmosphere, and there would be sudden destruction and complete destruction of the Earth and everything around the Earth, including the moon. But somehow we have pictures of this thing in our atmosphere, and I'm guessing they must have a magical camera or a real smartphone that can take this picture, because they are the only ones that get this picture, never mind the other 8 billion people on the face of this planet, that all they have to do is look up into the sky and see if there's something up there or not. But this Nibiru just sneaks into our atmosphere, then takes off, regardless of this thing called gravity, that would pull such an object down upon the Earth, which would result in the complete destruction of the Earth. But every year we get pictures of this Nibiru on its yearly flyby. You know, I'd feel much more comfortable if these talking heads, these watchmen on the wall, would actually check facts, maybe hire an independent astronomer to find this heavenly body. I mean, we got satellites that can spot them 6 light years away, but we can't spot them when they're 6 miles up in our atmosphere. Come on, people, this is total insanity, and this is what people are holding up as Christianity. And all it does is it cheapens and destroys a person's witness of Jesus being Messiah. And it makes Christianity and it makes the prophetic look like a circus, a very bad circus. So the next time you see a posting in Nibiru, just go at your front door, look up, and see if you can see it. I promise you, it ain't going to be there. And then go back to the YouTube posting that posted this dribble and tell that author to pound sand. Because they're lying to you, they're gaming you, or worse yet, they believe in it, which means they too have a chip in their head and are hearing from the extraterrestrials that are from Nibiru. Either that, or they're hearing from the spirit that brings doctrines of demons into the body of Christ. Hello? Test the spirit. Enough said. Let's move forward.
The first time I walked outside, there were 2 enormous bright moons in the sky. Well, I went back in the house and then I came back outside. It was dark and the moons were like just glowing, like they were so bright. And then there was the sun, and it was like blood red, and there was like this black smoky stuff covering it. It was like a mist. And then I went back in the house, and then I came back out, and it was a moon and a half. Like, I don't know where the other half of the moon went, but it was not showing. It was just a moon and a half. During that time, I was at the end of the dream. I felt as if the rapture was literally about to happen. Like the sky was, I don't know how to explain it, but it was like Jesus was coming, that the tribulation was about to begin. But in this dream, it was just like, time is up. Like, I was just running around like, oh my gosh, Jesus is coming. He said sudden destruction. They said sudden destruction.
Now you'll see that this last dream matches with this next dream. And this is that powerful dream I alluded to earlier that basically knocked me back on my heels. I look at it as a trilogy that God gave this young lady. I covered 2 of her dreams early on, and I put up the pictures that she drew and explained how her celestial storyline, both of them, were confirmed by the Stellarium timeline. strongly suggesting illuminated dates for rapture events starting on or about April 30th, that partial solar eclipse, and May 16th, the super blood moon.
I wanted to share a little bit more detail about this dream that I had January 10th. Well, all this time I'm walking, there is this storm brewing outside, like a storm from hell. And the clouds just kept billowing bigger and bigger and darker and angrier. I've never seen a storm like this in my life, not even in the movies. It was bad. And then I look over into the distance, just above the horizon, and I see, in all of this storm brewing, there's two moons. And they were very close to each other. They were both lit up on the left side in the crescent shape, and I could also see the silhouette of the dark side of the moon. So the one that was on the bottom was almost literally touching the horizon, and the one that was above it was just above it and slightly off to the right a little bit. I want to say just slightly above the trees. So they were both very low down on the horizon. And I want to say in most of the rapture dreams I have where I see two moons, and I've heard other people say this as well, is that they're always, or not always, most of the time they're like down on the horizon. So I'm not sure what that means, but that's where they were at. They were both lit up in a crescent shape. I can't even describe it because I've never seen anything like it, not even in the movies. It was just so real. This dream was more real than me sitting here talking to you right now, because when I saw the two moons, I thought, oh my gosh, that is the sign that God is showing his people that we will see, like the moment that the rapture happens, somehow that's what we'll see. And I've heard hundreds of other people say, I had a dream that the rapture happened and I saw two moons that very second that we were gone. So it's not like, oh my gosh, we saw two moons and then tomorrow or the next day was when it happened. It's like a heads up, no time left. It's happening right this moment. And then everybody in town, all of a sudden, they start saying 5, 4, 3, 2, and they just start counting down from 5. I don't know why they were counting down from 5, but I knew it was like happening in slow motion in my mind, because I'm like, okay, this is it for real. It's finally really happening. I didn't even know that I was dreaming. I thought it was actually happening. And so I'm like, okay, this is the real actual moment that the rapture is actually happening. And this part I don't understand. I don't take it literally, so please let me explain when I tell you this because of what I saw. So I said in my mind, I was like, and I just thought about leaving this part out, but it was there for a reason and I'm not going to leave it out. I said, wow, since this is really it, I wonder what is the infamous day in history that this thing happens, because we've all been wondering and watching and waiting. What the heck is the day? What the heck is the date that this thing happens? I just was curious and wanted to know, even though I was out of there. So in that slow motion countdown, I whipped out my phone and I looked and it said January 8th and the year was blurred out. And again, when I had this dream, it was January 10th, but in the dream, I didn't know what day it was. I didn't even have a thought of what? January 8th, that's already come and gone. Everything else in the dream was very realistic, very detailed, very from God. So why would I have that one random piece that doesn't matter? Why would I do that? So I was like, when does it happen? It said January 8th. And I was like, okay, that's the day. And then I go 2, 1. And then just like that, we were just transported. We found ourselves in this room that was like a holding area or like a waiting room. I said, we are going to live safe here forever and it'll be awesome. It'll never end. We get to live with Jesus for all eternity and it'll be wonderful. But in this dream, when the rapture happened, we were gone before the storm itself touched ground and happened. So again, please don't say that I'm saying, oh my gosh, the rapture is going to happen on January 8th. I don't know why that was put in there. And that's when I woke up. And when I woke up and looked at the clock, it was 9:11. So that was the dream.
Okay, the first thing she sees is a storm brewing, a storm from hell. It hasn't arrived yet, but she's seeing it form coming her way. I think a fair guess on that would be the tribulation. Then she saw two moons, very close to each other, both lit up on the left side and in a crescent shape. Now that's extremely important. These are the little details that eliminates a lot of erroneous possibilities. And she could see the silhouette of the dark side of the moon. That too is important. Then she stated the one on the bottom was almost literally touching the horizon. And then the second moon she saw was slightly above and to the right of this first moon, kind of on the level where the trees are at. It too was lit up on the left side. Let me throw up some trees on the stellarium landscape, and let's see where the trees and this moon present themselves in relationship to each other. Lo and behold, the far moon to the right that's lit up on the left-hand side is right at the top of the tree line. Now at this point, I'm inserting a major update to the last posting of this part in the 5-part series, which was posted on March 24th. I had to do this because, well, the blood moon and Passover of May 16th has come and gone, and some of the original understanding when we first started decoding these moon dreams was heavily influenced by the bright and shiny object in the heavens, that blood moon. So that's where the focus went in trying to find a timeline from stellarium that would support these dreams. It didn't occur to me that it could be something days later, weeks later, a month later. That didn't occur to me, so I didn't look in that area. But now that these dates have come and gone, well, that rendering from stellarium sufficiently failed enough to get me to look at maybe a possible different rendering. And I'll remind you, every one of these dreams, as far as the moon phase, every one of them came to pass exactly how they saw it. There's just one piece being left out, and that's the rapture-related events that they also saw in the dreams. And in actuality, those are still in play because even they were a little bit ambiguous as to when they would exactly happen. A lot of them said it's going to happen right now, I think. Some said it's about to happen. Some use the words time is short. Some imply the rapture is imminent. Doesn't necessarily mean it happened right on the same point in time that was defined by their eclipse that they saw, or a star alignment that they saw, or the combination thereof. So here's the update. That first young lady, and you can read what she has, that she posted there, the words to her dream. She said she saw a moon and then a half moon. And this is after seeing two full moons. So I believe the two full moons is May 15th and the May 16th. That's the eclipse. The two super full moons on the same night. That's a blood moon. That is an eclipse. Then she came out again. Now she's saying one moon, which I think points back to those two moons, and a half moon. And a half moon is anything less than 50% illumination. That's where a half moon starts. It's also called a crescent moon. You can have a sliver crescent up to a half moon. By definition, that is what a crescent moon is. Less than 50% illumination down to the very last sliver of either a waning moon or a waxing moon. That is a crescent. It's a 7-day period. And she said she saw a full moon, then a half moon, and after that half moon, they were saying, peace and safety, peace and safety. That's a prophecy given us by the Apostle Paul in 1 Thessalonians 5:3. It says, when they are saying, and the Greek is commanding, when they are commanding peace and safety, then sudden destruction will come upon them, as travail upon a woman with child. Well, on May 23rd, 2022, the Peace and Security Committee of the World Health Organization met with other world leaders to discuss the peace and security of the entire world because there are new pandemics coming our way. And many news agencies are reporting how 150 sovereign nations are going to be giving over their peace and security and sovereignty to the World Health Organization the next time a pandemic is released. And it gives authority to the World Health Organization to conduct law enforcement and military interventions upon all nations if a nation or a group or a people in that nation is spreading anything they consider to be misinformation or refusing vaccines or lockdowns. They can come in and apply law enforcement and military force to force people into complete compliance. This is happening as we speak, and that meeting is from May 22nd to May 27th of the year 2022. So if there's a world declaration by the WHO that they now have authority to do this, this could very well be the fulfillment of 1 Thessalonians 5:3. This information was not available to me at the beginning of the year when I started to unfold and decode these moon dreams. So I was stuck on looking at everything on or about that blood moon. Well, this is only 2 weeks later, and it's after that full moon followed by a half moon that this lady saw, where in her dream she said, they're saying peace and safety, there'll be some destruction. This is in the month of May. And now looking to Holly Two Moon's dream of 2 half moons, or 2 crescent moons she calls them. Well, she saw 2 crescent moons lit up on the left-hand side, one close to the horizon, the other just to the right of it, and it is on the top of the tree line. There are some pictures right there for you from Stellarium. That is May 22nd, 2022, just below 49 degrees illumination. That's the first moon. It's close to the horizon, and there's your second one. That's on June 21st, thereabouts. It too is just below 49 degrees illumination, and it's on top of the tree line, just like she said. And tied in with that dream is her 5-point countdown, starting on January 8th. And I'll explain what that means. It points to the month of May. So what's in play here with this update is that we have a date that is sometime in the month of May. We have Rosh Hashanah on the 2nd of May. We have Passover. We have the blood moon on midnight on the 15th of May going into the 16th of May. Therefore, the 16th of May is Passover. We have the barley wave offering on the 22nd of May, which is the 7th day of unleavened bread for this first Passover of 2022, May 16th. We also have that dream of a green moon, a green, huge super moon. That's pointing to the month of May. And now we have the declaration of peace and security happening in the month of May. So what's in play here are some dates. The more serious dates starting the 30th of April, that partial solar eclipse, and going forward to the 3rd week in June. And I believe the half moon that this one lady saw and the first half crescent that Holly Two Moon saw are the same moon, and that's the half crescent moon of May 22nd. But Holly normally gets her dreams with 2 moons, so she has 2 half moons. And there's no way you can have 2 half moons in the same night. So this has to be talking about a moon phase or a moon cycle from a half moon to a half moon. And in this case, they would be waning because they're coming off a full moon and they're lit up on the left-hand side. And just a week earlier, from her second half moon, will be the full moon of June, and that's the second Passover. And what does she see when she wakes up from her dream? She sees 911. Well, the book of Numbers 911, that is to say the 9th chapter, 11th verse, is speaking about the second Passover. And that may just refer back to her dream of a dirty moon over a full moon, where she said, and the bridegroom comes at the midnight hour. I'll say again, I didn't have this information about the peace and security. I didn't have that back at the beginning of the year, give or take a few weeks, when I started really putting this stuff together. And all the focus was on that blood moon because it had the biggest buzz to make application to. My bad. Sorry about that, but that's all I had to work with. And now I am correcting, and this too may require correcting. I'm just throwing stuff out there, hoping people will try to wrap their heads around this and come up with a better answer. But this is the best one I've got. And right now, if I apply it to world events, man, it's looking like it could pop at any time. Well, as far as Holly Two Moon's dream of the darkened silhouette moon over a bright moon, and then her 2 crescent moons lit up on the left-hand side, Well, obviously, that didn't produce any rapture events or any major world stage end time events. But it did get us focused on God's true month of Rosh Hashanah, that being the month of Exodus, the month of Passover. So we got another shot at this thing with this last blood moon of the 4 blood moon tetrad. And that blood moon is assigned to this year's Festival of Tabernacles. And we just got some brand new prophetic dreams in that are saying pretty much the exact same thing. We need to be looking to this partial solar eclipse on October 25th, and this would match Holy Two Moons, half crescent moons, if we applied it to her 911, which is the full moon of September, making that first crescent moon that she saw the waning crescent we find in the month of September. And the second waning crescent would be the week before that partial solar eclipse, the 3rd week in October. So not only is Holly Two Moons seeing 2 moons, she's seeing application of 2 moons, which I find highly amazing because she always talks about seeing 2 moons. Well, God's giving her 2 moons multiple times. I see the last 2 moons of the tetrad. I see these 2 crescent moons. I see the 2 moons in the same night that produce these blood moons. And I see her darkened moon over the bright moon. And I see God walking us through all his appointed times, all his covenant dates, and all his holy convocations for the year 2022, based on all these 2 moons. I guess time will tell. And I will later talk about a cracked star turning to light, turning to a beam of light. If that cracked star pops off, then game over. That will be the greatest cosmic confirmation that God could provide us that the taking of the bride has just happened or is about to happen. And if it's just about to happen, then you have days or minutes to respond to the Lord, to ask him to bring you into his bride company, to be the bride of Christ. So again, I apologize that I even have to do updates, but that's all I got to work with, and that's how the Lord walks me through my journey. I don't get prophetic dreams, I don't get prophetic answers. I get rabbit holes, and I got to figure it out. I got to grind it out. So what you're looking at is my grinding process and the solutions that have presented themselves in this journey that I'm on. So in conclusion of this update, the previous dreams are all pointing to the blood moon and the Passover of May 15th and 16th, where these last 2 dreams are carrying it a little bit more forward, where a re-evaluation of some of these last dreams and the inclusion of some recent dreams pushed the narrative all the way into Tabernacles, that being the 2nd and 3rd week of November 2022. And if we bear witness to a world declaration of peace and security, then that pretty much locks it in. And if that cracked star goes off, along with these other items I've just mentioned, well, like I said, game over. God sent his message, and hopefully it'll be received. Now, in her vision, Holy Two Moons talks about January 8th. And when I saw this months ago when she first posted this, I was, I couldn't make heads or tails of it because there's no appointed time on January 8th. So I dug and I dug and I dug and I found it. What is January 8th? Something Hebrew, something covenant, something Torah. And one of the last things I checked was some information on a tradition that the Hebrew priests practice even onto today. And this has to do with a weekly Torah reading. On January 8th, they read what's called the Parashat Bo. It's a reading of a portion of the Torah, in particular Exodus 10 through Exodus 13, verse 16. Those verses speak on the last 3 plagues on Egypt and the first Passover. Now keep in mind, in the dream, she got this date while in the middle of a countdown. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Hint, hint, it is what happens on that 1 that should grab our attention. Let me read the Wikipedia comment on this Parashat Bo. In Hebrew, the command form of go or come, and the first significant word in the parasha, in Exodus 10 verse 1, the 15th week Torah portion in the annual Jewish cycle of Torah reading. In other words, they read this on the same day every year and have been ever since they've been doing it. This is the Torah reading and the 3rd in the book of Exodus. The parasha consists of Exodus 10:1 through Exodus 13 verse 16. The parasha tells of the last 3 plagues of Egypt and the first Passover. So there it is again. It's confirmed by a different source. And I'll throw these up on the screen for you to read. Well, get your Bibles out and turn to Exodus 12:2. This is smack right in the middle of those verses that they read on this day. And this is the verse that speaks about the Passover. God said to Moses, "This month shall be unto you the beginning of months. It shall be the Rosh Hashanah for you." Yeah, that's what it says in the Hebrew. This is the Rosh Hashanah. God gave Moses, the children of Israel, a Rosh Hashanah. It's not the 7th month of the Hebrew year, which is a perversion brought back from Babylon when Israel came out of Babylon after serving their gods after 70 years of captivity. The month they call Tishri, which is named after a pagan god. No, there's only one Rosh Hashanah mentioned in Scripture. This is the only verse in the Old Testament that uses Rosh and Hashanah in the same sentence. And it's the only chapter and verse that holds this one sentence. God never called the 7th month Rosh Hashanah. He called it the 7th month. And he never called the first month Nisan. That too is a perversion and named after the god of the spring equinox of Babylon. So why are we getting all this perversion and corruption from the traditions of a backslidden nation that was serving the gods that they're naming these months after when they're in Babylon? In fact, all the months right now, today, all the Hebrew months are named after gods that they served while in Babylon. And we have lost God's true Rosh Hashanah. The Rosh Hashanah is the first day of the month that Passover is in. It symbolizes Christ being God's calendar and God's chronometer. All time, everything is based on the resurrection of Christ. Or at least it's supposed to be. That's why God set it up in the manner he did. His calendar, his dates, his appointed times are based on that first day of that month where Passover falls. And our theologians and our pastors and our teachers can't see this because they're wound up in the traditions of man-made religions or man-perverted religions where they use the spring equinox instead of the ripened and harvested barley. The typology pointing to Christ being the first ripened barley that is crushed and roasted and wave offered to God during the 7 days of unleavened bread. And on Jesus' timeline, that was the 3rd day of unleavened bread, following a weekly Sabbath which followed the high Sabbath. Jesus rose on the day of the wave offering. Jesus was that first fruit barley wave offering offered to God in the month of God's true Rosh Hashanah. And that first day of that month of Passover determines all the subsequent festival days, such as Passover, the 7 days of unleavened bread, the first day of weeks, Pentecost, then trumpets, Tabernacles, the 8th day of Tabernacles. That first day determines all the rest of the appointed times of God, and they've all been wrong for thousands of years because of the compromise of religious leaders who served the gods of Babylon. So now we have January 8th, which is come and gone. I mean, obviously, it was not a date for the rapture, or we wouldn't be here. And God did not tell this young lady which year it was. She actually saw on her phone January 8th, but the year was blurred or blotted out. So God was keeping that information from us. I guess he wanted us to dig and seek things out. Remember, it's the glory of God to hide a thing. It's the glory of kings to seek them out. So when I saw the parashah or parashat bow and the theme that's behind it, and have recently come into the understanding of Exodus 12:2, the Rosh Hashanah of God, I knew exactly what that countdown meant. Think back to that dream where this dreamer saw this huge, big, green moon. There was a countdown in that dream as well. It also included a nativity scene. So that dream connects very snugly with the first dream of this trilogy that we're looking at. She saw a super green moon, which I discerned to be a supermoon in the month of May, and included in that, she saw the nativity scene we just spoke of. Then she saw candles burning down, morphing into what appears to be sparklers, and a New Year's Eve celebration finished off by a countdown. In other words, we have multiple dreams matching up, and a countdown seems to be critical in both dreams. And in this dream, the people in the dream start counting down from 5. So how about this? 5 January, 4 February, 3 March, 2 April, 1 Rosh Hashanah, Passover. Now I cropped a lot of her video so I could fit this all in, but I got the main points there. But in there, I believe she says something to the effect that And then the storm from hell that she was seeing pretty much overcame the people in the place where she had just been and taken away from. Tribulation. In other words, everything she said is consistent with what the Bible teaches concerning the start of the tribulation, which I believe is the bride goes up, the tribulation starts. And when does that happen? Well, obviously not around May 16th, but there's been multiple dreams and prophecies now pointing to 11/11, which would be November 11th. That's 3 days into the 7 days of Tabernacles, 2022. Obviously, there's no way to prove that, but the world is at war right now, if you haven't noticed. That could escalate in a heartbeat. And in Revelations 6, verses 12 through 17, well, there's a full moon that turns to blood. Right about that time when all the mountains and all the islands are moved off their foundations. That would be a Noah event. And we've been talking a lot about Noah in this video. So, as in the days of Noah, so these dreams are highlighting the month of May and the month of November. And God's Rosh Hashanah of Exodus 12:2, according to all my calculations and discernment, begins on May 2nd, and that is the first day of the first month of God's calendar, and it is the first day of this next 7-year Shemitah that we have just entered into. And God uses the Shemitah to bring whatever he wants to bring in a 7-year cycle. Remember the 7-year cycles of Joseph in Egypt? 7 years of plenty, 7 years of famine. Well, I think it's going to be 7 years of famine, 7 years of tribulation. Shemitah. The Shemitah starts on Rosh Hashanah. Not on the 7th month of a Hebrew secular calendar, but on the Rosh Hashanah, the first month, the Passover month, the Aviv month of God's calendar. You don't attach appointed times of God, which is sacred godly things, to a secular calendar. You attach it to God's calendar. That's why he calls it his appointed times. And just to double emphasize, if not triple emphasize, the importance of God's Rosh Hashanah, take a look at Exodus 40. Break out your Bible, open it up, and read it. Exodus 40, verse 2. On the first day of the first month, that's God's Rosh Hashanah, you shall set up the tabernacle of the tent of the congregation, and thou shalt put therein the ark of the testimony, or the ark of the covenant. This is all covenantal stuff, guys. Thou shalt put therein the ark of the covenant, and cover the ark with the veil. Then the next half of that chapter is God telling Moses to take all the utensils, all the items, all the hardware involved in the covenantal rites of the blood sacrifices and everything involving that, and the anointings and the cleansing. You take all that stuff, you cleanse them, and you anoint them. Then you take Aaron, you cleanse him, then you clothe him, and then you anoint him. Then you take his sons, the priesthood, you cleanse them, you clothe them, and you anoint them. And this just isn't some piddly little anointing. The high priest would get 2 gallons of oil poured on his head. How is that for an anointing? It speaks of a heavy anointing. It speaks of God means business. He wants his chosen anointed. Aaron was a type pointing to Christ, our high priest. And what happened when Moses did this? Well, when Moses did this, in obedience to God's instructions, the presence of God came down so heavily on the tent of the congregation that Moses couldn't enter in. That wasn't a bad thing. That was a good thing. I mean, Moses entered in later, but what we see is, man, God poured out his Spirit. When? On Rosh Hashanah. Not 6 months later on a Hebrew compromised secular calendar. He did it on his calendar. And this calendar for this year puts Rosh Hashanah on May 1st, May 2nd, at the appearing of the sliver crescent moon, which starts the first day of the Hebrew year for this year, 2022. Rosh Hashanah for this year is not on September 25th, as we would find if we Googled for it. God ain't going to show up then. He'll show up in his Rosh Hashanah. He only shows up on his appointed dates, and his appointed dates all start on his Rosh Hashanah. That is why the Hebrew nation missed Pentecost of Acts chapter 2 when Pentecost was fully come. They practiced their count and their spring equinox-based calendar on a day God did not recognize. And that's why we see possibly only a couple thousand devout Jews hanging around when tongues of fire fell on the disciples who were waiting on the power of God. If the Jewish nation was truly dialed into God's proper Pentecost, There should have been 300,000 Hebrew males in Jerusalem on the day of Pentecost. That's mentioned in Acts chapter 2 when Pentecost is fully come. And there should have been way more than 3,000 being filled with the Spirit on that day. Acts chapter 2 fulfilled the day where Moses came down from the mountain to bring the lot of the people so it could be written on their hearts, hearts that were not prepared after 50 days of partying while Moses was up on the mountain for 40 of those days, and 3,000 were destroyed by the sons of Levi at the direction of Moses. Well, in Acts chapter 2, Jesus sent down the law of God and wrote it upon our hearts, and 3,000 were saved. This all taking place at the time of the grape harvest because the disciples were accused of being drunk on new wine, and the grapes for that new wine are only harvested in late summer to early fall. That's not 50 days after Passover or the barley wave offering. That's 50 days after the first day of the Festival of Weeks. And to get to the first day of the Festival of Weeks, you count 49 days from the time you profane or pierce the barley. The profaning and piercing of the barley is when you take the first fruit barley that came from the completed harvest process and you take a first fruit handful of it and you crush it into flour and you mix it with oil and bake it, roast it into unleavened cake or unleavened bread. Then you bring it to the priests where they take it and put some of it on the altar to be consumed by God. They store some of it away and take a little of it and partake of it with the farmer. Thus the farmer is presenting himself before God one more time during that 7 days of unleavened bread. And God gets the first bite of the harvest, the first fruits. 49 days from then is the first day of the Festival of Weeks. On or about that time, then you start counting 50 days. The 50 days represent the 50 days the children of Israel were at the base of Mount Sinai waiting for the law to come down. Well, it took them 45 days to get there. Then it took an extra 50 days to receive the law. So the counting of the 50 represents and reenacts the 50 days they're at the base of the mountain, not 50 days from the Exodus. But the Jews, after coming out of Babylon, muffed this all up with a perverted calendar and a perverted tradition. They missed Pentecost. They observed their Pentecost 50 days after the wave offering, which is days apart from Passover, whereas the disciples were with Jesus that 49 days, and Jesus ascended on the 49th day, which is the first day of the Festival of Weeks, and then they waited in Jerusalem and prayed and sought God for about 50 days. That calculation for God's Pentecost day is given in the Torah in Leviticus 23:15. And the King James rendering is the correct rendering. And you shall count unto you from the morrow after the Sabbath, and that's the weekly Sabbath, because that's when Jesus rose, was after the weekly Sabbath, not the high Sabbath, but the weekly Sabbath. And you shall count from the morrow after the Sabbath, from the day that you brought the sheaf of the wave offering, you shall complete 7 Sabbaths. Or as the King James put it, 7 Sabbaths shall be completed. Then, on the morrow after that last Sabbath, then you start the 50 count. And we have just discovered in the last few weeks that you do not count the 7th day of unleavened bread as a Sabbath. First of all, it's not a Sabbath. It's a holy convocation, a day you do no work. So it's like a vacation day where everybody gets together. That's what convocation means, a gathering. But the word Sabbath is nowhere found in the description of the first day of the 7 days of unleavened bread, nor the 7th day or the last day of the 7 days of unleavened bread. Yes, I get it. It's a day you do no work. But on a Sabbath, there are a few other items that have to be observed, such as you can prepare food on a convocation, but you cannot prepare food on a Sabbath. In addition, you're not supposed to kindle a fire on a Sabbath, but you can do that on your day of no work, a holy convocation. How do I know that? Because you're going to kindle a fire to cremate the remains of the lamb on the first day of 7 days of unleavened bread, which is Passover. You're supposed to throw into the fire where you baked it to ensure that everything is consumed of that lamb. Bones, meat, hide, everything. And the Jews turned that first day of unleavened bread into a Sabbath, but look what you're doing. You're crucifying, roasting, and ripping apart a lamb with your running shoes on, your legs girded, staff in hand, ready to beat feet out of Egypt. That's not Sabbath. And again, you will not find the word Sabbath in the Old Testament the actual word, you will not find that in the Hebrew for Passover, that being the first day of unleavened bread, nor the last day of the seventh day of unleavened bread. So that is not one of the Sabbaths that you complete after that barley wave offering, the day after of which you start counting 50. You only complete 7 weekly Sabbaths. And this was a major correction after God took me through an incredible journey to find this. And again, you can find this in the 2-part series with the introduction entitled Passover Pentecost and the Seventh Day Weekly Sabbath Lost. You can find it on my YouTube channel, or you can just pull your cursor up to the right-hand corner of your screen, pull down the iCard, click on the iCard, and the menu of all my available videos will drop down, and you'll see the introduction to that Passover Pentecost and the Seventh Day Weekly Sabbath Lost. Just click on it. That following day, after all those Sabbaths were complete, the following day you start counting 50. That gives you Pentecost. That's the same day Moses came off the mountain with the tablets. 3,000 were destroyed because they did not prepare their hearts. And to this day, the Hebrew culture calls that day of Moses Pentecost. So why isn't our Pentecost the same as the Pentecost of Moses? It's because it was perverted. And the entire nation of Israel missed Pentecost. They missed the infilling of the Holy Spirit. They missed the tongues of fire. They missed the gifts of the bride. And what I am seeing with God's Rosh Hashanah is a powerful moving of God's Spirit on His day. A moving of cleansing and a moving of anointing. And He ain't showing up on the 7th month of a Hebrew calendar. He's showing up on His Rosh Hashanah. Guys, this is weighty stuff. This is God stuff. This is powerful stuff. And the religious leaders of both the Jews and us Christians have messed this up to no end. Get into the Word and see how God told Moses to do it, and see how Moses did it, and see how God then recorded it in the Torah for future generations to do it correctly. I have this stuff clearly spelled out, and there's also an adept deep dive study into 4 prophetic timelines. The first being what God told Moses to do, which is recorded in the Torah. The second prophetic timeline is what Moses did with the children of Israel in response to those instructions. The third timeline is the Torah, in other words, how God recorded it for future generations to conduct themselves and to reenact these appointed times of God. And the fourth timeline is how Jesus fulfilled it. And in that study you come away with is a timeline that has these 4 prophetic timelines complementing and fulfilling each other, sometimes to the very second. That gives me much better confidence that the timeline I'm actually following is the correct one. That's the timeline I want. So if by chance you're having a hard time counting, 5 January, 4 February, 3 March, 2 April, 1 Rosh Hashanah, Passover, the full blood moon eclipse, May 16th. I strongly believe that this young lady received all of these 3 dreams from God. These are prophetics, prophetic dreams. They're celestial storylines that are expressed perfectly through the stellarium timeline, pointing close to when something big's going to happen. I'm not saying I'm setting dates, because in that one dream she says, and the bridegroom comes at the midnight hour. Which midnight are we talking about? Are we talking Jerusalem time? Are we talking about the midnight where this lunar eclipse is taking place? Are we talking the very last seconds, the international date line west? Is it the next following midnight in Jerusalem? I don't know. Give it a shot. Figure it out. These aren't my dreams. I'm not a dream interpreter, and I don't know the day or the hour. In fact, let me throw another monkey wrench into the equation. Because that midnight hour belongs to something, and the Passover, May 16th, is come and gone. And her January 8th date that she saw in her vision points to the month of May, but the 2 half moons she saw start on May 22nd, May 23rd, which is the 7th day of unleavened bread, and walk forward a month to about June 21st. Well, there is another sort of an appointed time towards the end of that half moon to half moon, and that's the second Passover. That'll be on or about June 15th. And the reason I bring it up is because after she woke up from her dream, she saw on her clock the number 911. And we know the number 911 is notorious for chaos and destruction, but what a lot of people have missed is that 911 is also in Numbers. Numbers 911 is the scripture that talks about the second Passover. And Passover, either the first or the second Passover, has significant typology with the mid of night. So we're seeing numbers and typology all seem to be playing into these dreams, and these dreams are giving us signs and wonders suggesting rapture events, starting from late last year of 2021 with the second blood moon of the 4 blood moon tetrad in November, a full solar eclipse in December, and then we have the majority of the dreams highlighting the partial solar eclipse on May 30th with the 5-planet alignment, and the eclipses pointing to the super blood moon of May 15th into the 16th. Then we have the moon in the half, which points to the half moon on the 7th day of unleavened bread on May 22nd, 23rd, along with the World Health Assembly and World Health Organization, WHO, attempting to establish the Peace and Security Committee, which closely identifies with 1 Thessalonians 5:3, the Apostle Paul's prophecy of peace and safety, or as some translations have, peace and security. And now we have Hawley's 911, which could easily be represented by Numbers 911, Numbers 9:11, which is the second Passover. And that could possibly be the midnight that she saw in one of her dreams of the trilogy of the bridegroom will come in the midnight hour. And now we have just learned that Holly Two Moon's dream of the darkened silhouette over the bright moon is exactly matched with the blood moon of November 7th into the 8th. And actually, that one makes the most sense, especially when you start lining up these newer dreams we've just received in the last couple weeks, last couple months. Especially with this planetary alignment that happened mid-year that only happens once every 1,000 years, which also happened back in the day of Noah, as we found out through Stellarium. How's that for as in the days of Noah? So all the former dreams, current dreams, and their newer dreams keep extending what appears to be God's timeline to that Festival of Trumpets, the 2nd and 3rd week of November. Check out these planetary alignment dreams.
So I was asleep one night, and very vividly I started to see a line of a parade of planets up close. And then it zoomed out. So you could see the planets not along the horizon, but almost horizontally, but at an angle, lining up. But underneath them, a candelabra or a menorah showed up. Like it was a gold menorah right underneath where they were lining up in the sky.
Okay, I would like to share a dream with you that I had in October of 2021. I live in the Western Cape in South Africa, and the dream started off with me standing in my aunt's backyard. It was in daylight, and I looked at the sun, or I believe that it was the sun, was very bright. However, I just want to mention, in my dream, I perceived these two celestial bodies to be moons. They looked 100% like suns, but in my dream I remember thinking that they're two very bright moons. I saw about 5 or 6 celestial bodies in the sky. They looked to be planets, but I remember again in my dream thinking that they looked like moons, but they were full circular, like a planet would be. And they all started moving around, and I remember specifically just looking at the planets moving around and not having a clue or not understanding what it is that I was seeing. And then they started forming a straight line, and as soon as they lined up, it's as though somebody flipped a switch in me, and I immediately knew it is now, the rapture is now. And it's only in April this year where I saw a few videos of the rare planetary alignment that started at the end of April, and I had a look. It actually continues until the end of June, and I think it is in June 24th. Pretty much all 9 of the planets line up. They all line up on one side of the sun. The 4 initial planets that lined up at the end of April, the previous time that they lined up in the way that they did on the same side of the sun was over 1,000 years ago.
And it was a very vivid dream, but I remember going outside and I remember seeing planets in a line. This planet right here, I believed in my dream it was the moon, but it wasn't like the yellow moon that I was describing earlier. It was like a moon that looks like do you guys have Solarium? Because if you ever notice on YouTube videos, or if you have the app and you see the moon, it's like a grayish color, like a dark color. So that's how I saw it in my dream, and it was in a line diagonally like this. And I knew in my spirit that as long as these planets were in a line, the rapture was going to happen.
Now, these three dreams, when married together, appear to be pointing to June 15th of 2022. And this corroborates well with those three dreams that I did a little refining to. The first being the moon and the half, the second being the crowned moon with the full moon to the right of it, being the next full moon. And then Holly Two Moons, her two half crescent moon dream with the countdown from January 8th, counting down 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. When all this new information is brought together, it appears to be pointing to the full moon of June 15th. That would be the second Passover for 2022. And I'll remind you, when Holly Two Moon woke up from her dream, she saw 911 on her clock. Well, in the book of Numbers, Numbers 911, or Numbers chapter 9, verse 11, is the second Passover. Unless we forget, in Exodus chapter 16, it was on that second Passover time. There was no second Passover observed at that particular time of the Exodus. That happened a year later when that was installed by God. But on that 15th day of the second month, which would correspond to the second Passover, that is when the children of Israel ran out of barley grain, and God instituted the 7-day week, with the seventh day being the weekly Sabbath. So this June 15th of 2022 has great significance, and it's highly possible, if not highly probable, that God is including it in this restoration of His time in His covenant and His appointed times, because His covenant begins on Rosh Hashanah, the first day of the first month, the month of Aviv, the month of Passover, and in that month you have the first Passover, and into the second month you have the second Passover, and the origins of the 7-day week, with the convocation for that time period being the seventh day, the weekly Sabbath. And if that isn't enough to highlight this time period beginning on the 15th of June, check out Genesis 7:11. Now, I know a lot of people, including myself, continually see the number 711, and this might be why. Genesis 7:11 is speaking of Noah. And what did Jesus say about Noah? Well, when it comes to his return, when it comes to the rapture, he said a lot that, as in the days of Noah. What does as in the days of Noah mean? Well, Noah was a type of the church who God placed in the ark of safety. That would be a type of Jesus. And in the second month, on the 17th day, Noah, his family, and all the animals got lifted off the earth by the judgment that was coming down upon the earth. So Genesis 7:11 or 7:11 states, in the 600th year of Noah's life, in the second month, the 17th day of the month, the same day were all the fountains of the great deep broken up, and the windows of heaven were opened. It stands to reason that is the day of Noah's rapture, or his being caught up, as it were, in typology. And a lot of people also see the number 717, which has been going on for years. That too may have application here. Or Genesis 7:17, it says, and the flood was 40 days upon the earth, and the waters increased and bore up the ark, and it was lifted up above the earth. Again, a rather crude form of rapture, but that's when he was taken out of the Babylonian system of his time, and judgment came down upon that system. Now, Moses wrote the book of Genesis, and look what he assigned the first day of the first month of the first year of the new earth, as it were. It was Noah removing the covering of the ark and seeing that the ground was dry. New beginnings. That is Rosh Hashanah, the first day of the first month of God's calendar year. So there's a good chunk of typology there that we can work with. But it wasn't until the second month that Noah actually exited the ark, and that is in verses 14 through 16. So Noah was on the ark for a good year, and this is all covenantal stuff that I think is being dialed in to all the covenantal actions we find in the Exodus that was long ago expressed in the covenantal promises that God gave Noah. And I have to ask the question, when did Noah first see the covenantal sign of the rainbow? Well, probably when he removed the covering of the ark. Now, there's no way for sure to know if that happened on the first day of the first month or the 27th day of that first month. But it looked like God painted that covenantal sign in the sky for Noah on the month that God's word calls Rosh Hashanah. This would be new beginnings. And it definitely was new beginnings for Noah, as opposed to a little window that he let the raven out and the dove out through. And because of the massive amount of moisture that was still in the atmosphere, just from all the rain drying up, I'm guessing there was rainbows everywhere all the time and in a constant parade before Noah's eyes. So what am I trying to say here about Noah? Well, it's covenant, covenant, covenant. And the dates associated with the days of Noah that Noah experienced are all lining up with these redefined moon dreams that I've updated and these brand new planetary alignment dreams. And I'll suggest once again, go see that part 2 of Passover Pentecost and the 7th day Weekly Sabbath Lost. It really gets into this stuff, and you'll find that the moon phases and blood moon tetrads and planetary alignments that we were seeing this year, well, they happened back then, shortly before and during the flood. Simply incredible stuff. Gives a whole new meaning to as in the days of Noah. And with that study, we see God completing the restoration of his appointed times, his weekly Sabbath, and the covenants that he made with these great patriarchs. And now we have planetary alignment dreams that extend this rapture timeline past the May 16th blood moon into the end of June. And as I have alluded to, there are more dreams now that push it to Tabernacles of November. Now this one in particular, she draws what looks to be a full moon at the base, and all these other planets are going up at an angle to the left. And she states she saw 7 bright orbs, including the one she drew.
And I think it was 7 planets.
And this works perfectly with what we see from Jerusalem just above the horizon on certain dates of the year, starting from actually around the beginning of last December to, well, June 15th. You'll have 5 planets flanked by the moon and the sun right at sunrise. And that moon's going to be a little bit darker at that time of day because now it's competing with the atmospheric refraction as the sun is coming up. So its brightness is going to dim some before that moon sets. Now, we did not see that on May 16th of 2022 because the planet Mercury was in retrograde and its illumination dropped to about 2%. You could not see it visibly with the naked eye. On that particular full moon, right at sunrise, you would see the moon to the right, the sun to the left, and only 4 planets visible. And that is critical. In many of these dreams, these people were talking about planets that were visible. Now, in reality, all the planets are there, except for Earth, because you're standing on Earth watching this lineup do its parade. So for about a 6 to 7 month period, these planets are jockeying for position. They're going back and forth, jumping in front of one, jumping behind another. They're moving around, but they're lining up, and they stay lined up. And this is what that lady from South Africa said. She saw 5 or 6, I'm thinking 5 planets moving around. Then they lined up. And I would venture to guess the 2 moons she saw was the full moon of May 16th and the full moon of June 15th. And if that's the case, we're talking the same planetary alignment that ends on June 15th. After which Pluto drops back in its orbit, and it's no longer close to the other planets in this alignment. So now you only have 7 planets between the sun on the left and the moon on the right on this planetary alignment that is just above the horizon, lining up at an angle like these people saw, but now the alignment is incomplete because Pluto is no longer a part of the equation. And so technically that dream of this alignment comes to an end because you don't have 8 planets lining up between the sun and the moon, you only have 7. And when does that end take place? It takes place on June 15th, the second Passover. And this doesn't conflict with Revelation 6:12, where it talks about the moon becoming as blood on what appears to be a full moon, because the Greek, where it says full moon, can be entire moon or the whole moon, and I think it could be pointing to a moon cycle, or at any time there is a reflection of the sun's light off the moon, that's going to turn to blood. And I believe that's happening at the same hour the same timeline when the sun itself becomes black as sackcloth of hair. That in and of itself is not a solar eclipse because you're seeing the silhouette of the sun. It's just diminished and the sun is darkened because of something that's happening that's putting something between your perspective and the sun. And a complete solar eclipse, normally you don't see any of the sun. This sun has a color, it has an illumination, the sun has a silhouette. Basically, it looks like an orb covered in sackcloth. Let me throw up a picture of a sun that's behind a cloud of volcanic dust in the atmosphere. Kind of looks like it's dark as sackcloth. And an atmosphere choked with volcanic dust will turn the moon blood red. You see that in the fall during harvest season because of all the dust of the combining and the winnowing of the grains that gets up in the atmosphere, and that's where you get a harvest moon, which is a blood moon. So here's a picture of a blood moon, and this particular blood moon is caused by volcanic dust. Also keep in mind, this darkened sun and blood moon is going to be seen worldwide. A lunar eclipse or a solar eclipse is never seen worldwide. They can only be seen in a select area upon the globe, and that's only seen near or about where those eclipses are tracking. Revelation 6 is a worldwide phenomenon, and it is caused by this Noah-sized world earthquake that moves all the plates in the plate tectonics, which I believe is going to cook off all the major calderas and the Pacific Rim, blowing all these volcanoes. And the ash that comes from this volcanic activity is going to choke the atmosphere, dimming the sun and turning any phase of the moon to blood red. And this diminishing of the sun and the moon to blood may last years. I know a lot of people want to get into this 3 days of darkness, which was something that happened in Egypt and just in Egypt for 3 days. That was not a worldwide phenomenon. And you can't make it go away by saying Catholic rosaries and lighting Catholic candles and putting paper over your windows. Part of the doctrine. This is a diminishing of light you'll be able to see, and at night any moon phase will be turned to blood, but this could go on for weeks, months, possibly years, if a gazillion tons of volcanic ash is kicked up into the atmosphere. That's not going to clear itself in 3 days and 3 nights. And let me say once again, and emphasize heavily, that Holly Two Moons dream of that darkened moon silhouette over a full bright moon, where the moon will be dark at midnight and bright again at 1 o'clock, and the bridegroom comes in the midnight hour. Well, the second application to what it fulfills is that blood moon of November 7th into the 8th. And here she's talking about the storm from hell brewing, ready to slam into the people that are left on the earth after she's been raptured, where she wakes up from her dream and sees the clock at 911. And I contend that 911 is Genesis 911. That's Noah. That's the flood. And recent dreams suggest that this October 25th partial solar eclipse and a week before and possibly a few weeks after will be of great significance. And that blood moon for Tabernacles of November will complete God's appointed times, his covenant dates, and his convocations. Sounds like the perfect time for Noah events to take place, as in the days of Noah. Hey, check out my video entitled All His Appointed Times, and I get deep into this with the new visions and dreams that are coming forth, matching them with the many prophetic numbers people are seeing over and over again, especially 717 and 1111. It pulls together 3 biblical timelines that deal with 17, the 3rd day, and a 7-day appointed feast, where 717 most probably is referring to the 7th month, 17th day, which calculates out to be November 11th of this year. That's the 3rd day, there's that number 3, the 3rd day of Tabernacles. And 1111 would be the 11th month, 11th day, which is November 11th, just on our calendar. 717 would be the Hebrew calendar. So you have Jesus' passion and resurrection, Noah's flood, and this coming Tabernacles all have something to do with the 17th day of their particular Hebrew month and their major event happening on the 3rd day in a 7-day appointed time of God to their respective event. That's 3 17s, 3 3s, and 3 7 days. 3 3 3. And that last one is our 3. being 717 equals 1111. Again, the 7th Hebrew month, 17th day, which is our 11th month, 11th day, November 11th. 3rd day of the 7 days of Tabernacles. And that second application of Holly 2 moons, double moon, the shadowed silhouette over a full moon, where the bridegroom comes at the midnight hour, well, that is that November 7th to 8th blood moon. The last blood moon of the 4 blood moon tetrad we're currently in, the middle tetrad of 3. As in the days of Noah. The math is easy to do once you see it. You just got to sit down and do the math. And now you know why this particular video is so long, because I'm putting in all those dates that Noah experienced. You've got to see these dates manifested in the days of Noah to apply it to today. And these dreamers have been seeing it. Unfortunately, God has only been giving this to us one breadcrumb at a time over the last year. And so you see the necessity for all these updates. Sorry about that. Sorry for the long video, but that's the only way we are going to see it. And that's the way God chose to walk us through this. Any complaints need to go to his inbox, not mine. So you can see how these visions, these dreams, have slowly unfolded, and how we've gone from Rosh Hashanah, May 2nd of this year, to where I think this thing's going to climax. And that's going to be Tabernacles, possibly the 8th day of Tabernacles, the last convocation of this year. So let's go to part 3 of this 5-part series. Again, remember, these are teaching videos, and I'm trying to provide a solid and realistic decoding of all these dreams. So it's going to take some time. So pull your cursor to the upper right-hand corner of your screen. That small white sphere icard will come down. Click on it and look for this thumbnail. That's part 3. Click on that and it will bring you to part 3. And in part 3, we're going to find out what that cracked star is. Totally amazing. Just totally amazing.